Welcome to the Town Council Budget Meeting. This is Thursday, October 9th, 2025 at 9 a.m. We are both hybrid online and in Rebecca Hall on Columbia Avenue. First order of business will be a roll call starting to my right.
Ellen 11.
Dana, right?
Online.
Geneva
Teddy
Shauna.
Yarko.
Oh, sorry.
That's
And-
all right.
Perfect. All right, well, we're going to start with work sessions 1A, budget discussion, enterprise funds, open space, affordable housing, and all other funds. We have Kaylee Ranta and Zoe Donnell to present.
Sorry, let me join the meeting and share my screen. Okay, today we will be talking about our general or our enterprise funds and then all other funds that we didn't talk about at the September 25th meeting.
Can
Some
you
of
bring the
the-
mic down? Sorry.
Yep. Our other governmental funds, other than the capital and general funds that we already talked about, some of the larger ones are the Town Lodgers Tax Fund, Debt Service Fund, Restricted Fund, Energy Mitigation Fund, and there's a few other small ones. We'll talk about the Open Space and Affordable Housing Funds, our Water and Wastewater Enterprise Funds, Parking Enterprise Fund, and our Housing Enterprise Funds today. Again, just overview of our budget timeline. We started at the staff level on July 24th with the director's budget retreat. Went over goals and objectives at a budget workshop on August 12th. The council budget workshop on September 25th consisted of the capital funds and general fund and all the fees. And today we are talking about our enterprise funds and all other funds and adoption of the budget at the October 21st meeting. Here is an overview of all of our governmental funds that we will be talking about today, other than general and capital funds. So open space, transportation, airline guarantee, Town Lodgers Tax Fund, Conservation Trust Fund, our Affordable Housing Fund, Child Development, Health Reserve, Debt Service, Restricted Fund, and Energy Mitigation Fund. A large part of the revenues going into some of these funds is our tax revenues, the 4.5% sales tax. We'll be talking about 0.5% of that goes into the Affordable Housing Fund. And then the 2% food and lodgers excise tax, which goes to the Airline Guarantee Fund, and a 2% administrative fee is retained in the general fund. Our short-term rental excise tax of 2.5% all goes to the Affordable Housing Fund. And then Town Lodgers tax of 2% goes to the Town Lodgers Tax Fund. We will start out with the Debt Service Fund. This is a small fund with little activity going through it. It's used for special assessment debt service requirements, general obligation debt service, and lease purchase agreements. It is funded completely by about a $25,000 transfer annually from the general fund to make debt payments on the 2013 COPs, which were refunded in 2021. And it's the portion that's connected with the Marshalls building. The original financing was for the Pandora water treatment plant, and this fund has pretty much a zero fund balance annually. Go ahead and stop me if anybody has any questions on these smaller funds. The restricted fund was created and must be used for certain purposes. The major revenues are paper bag fees, which are collected by the grocery stores, dog surcharge fee, tree fee, Parks and Rec donations, and Marshall's donations. And then any additional revenue from the festival attendance fee, which goes into the general fund, is transferred into the restricted fund. after the expenses are taken out of that revenue. The 2026 budgeted ending fund balance is $99,000. And those Marshall's donations historically have gone towards a scholarship for a local student. The Energy Mitigation Fund is used for energy conservation projects and to offset the town's carbon footprint. The major revenues are temp fees and green building fees, which are charged on town building permits. In the past, we've used these revenues to contribute to funding Sunnyside Net Zero projects, helps to fund the Green Grants program with Eco Action Partners, purchase trees for replacement programs, used for climate action plan projects, and the 2026 budgeted ending fund balance is $372,000. And the sustainability division falls under this fund. I'll pass it over to Zoe to go over the mission.
And so we obviously had a work session on this earlier as well. It wasn't part of our timeline that led to where we are in this budget. Just as a reminder for the sustainability division, the mission for that is not only environmental, but also looking at social and economic, as they are three intertwined pillars of sustainability. The mission of sustainability is to enable the town to take proactive, solution-oriented approaches to ensure our future is fair, viable, and livable. Social sustainability focuses on improving social equity. Environmental sustainability focuses on our region's reduction in greenhouse gases. And our economic sustainability aims to improve the standard of living for the community, ensure the town's fiduciary responsibility. So with that, it looks like Darren's online as well. For the next slide to talk about the notable budget adjustments in his budget. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm coming back from Mountain Towns 2030 right now. So thanks for letting me join this way. From the September 9th meeting that Zoe just mentioned, this is really the same budget and the same focuses that we already discussed. I don't really have any updates on those, but just as I guess a reminder quickly, we're focusing in 26 on feasibility study for identifying and scoping any thermal energy network potential over at Public Works on Black Bear Road, La El and Carhenge, and that the RFP for that work is now out. So we did get a small grant contribution to that project. We have the next item. There's a small update on this, which is this is intended to be a grant-funded effort, and we were officially encouraged by the Colorado Energy Office to submit a full application for this effort. So that's kind of like the second hurdle we've cleared already for this, and that is the exploring the development of a community-wide building energy retrofit program. And just as a reminder, in our climate action plan, this is essentially the most impactful action item in that climate action plan that would look to retrofit building stock in the community. And like, as I always repeat, buildings being our highest emitting, or our largest sector tied to GHG emissions. So this grant application would be looking to fund consultants really to guide us through and carry out the work on a benchmarking and or building performance standard policy. So really excited about that opportunity. And then also other focuses is to explore a pilot incentive-based exchange program for landscaping equipment, to conduct the preparatory work we need to do the 2027 climate action plan update. And just as a reminder, the 2022 plan called for an adopted update every 5 years, or in the next 5 years. So 2027 is that date, but we want to make sure we're ready for that. And then, yes, so the final one there, explore a pilot program in downtown composting locations. So that's something we need a little bit of infrastructure, but mostly manpower hours. So human power hours, I should say. So that's something we'll be looking to coordinate with Eco Action and hopefully Ecology Commission as well. So main notes on adjustments. Some of those efforts required new funds. The grant effort I mentioned around buildings requires a match. So there's a matching amount in the budget that should be about 2.5% of the amount we'd be hoping to be awarded. The minimum match is 5%, but my staff time can count as in-kind match for that. So that's what we're looking for there. So since I already presented on this, I think I'll just stop there unless there are questions, unless you want me to go further, Zoe. So.
Oh, thanks, Darren. We'll open it for questions.
Not a question, but just a couple comments here. I wasn't in attendance to the September 9th meeting, but I did go back and listen to the tape on that one. And I just want to renew a bit of a call for continued emphasis on this area and continued resources for it, as sort of Darren was highlighting there, especially I think more staff and more helping hands on this is going to be critical for our community to reach our adopted 50% reduction by 2030 climate action goal. An update last year shows that we are not on track to meet that goal. So I think we are continuing to take strong actions, as Darren was identifying, especially around buildings and energy. That's going to be where some of the critical work lays. I think Darren's been doing a great job, but really, as he was just sort of highlighting himself there, only around half of his staff time is dedicated towards climate action work. He has other responsibilities. So this is a bit of a roundabout way of saying I think we should explore perhaps bringing in additional staff specifically for climate action. That's not necessarily a fully fleshed out concept for this budget year, since it would be pretty late in the game, obviously. But it's something I think we should examine certainly for our 2027 budget. Other ski towns have multiple staff people dedicated solely towards climate action. And if we are re-examining our funding structures and partnerships with other regional partners with the idea that our staff is going to pick up the slack, well, if we're going to do that, then we have to do it. And that would be where I'd want to emphasize it. Those are my initial thoughts. Happy to talk more or answer questions that people have. Thank you.
I think that's great. I think, we've been talking a lot about geothermal, and obviously, if all the stars align the way that we all want them to, I think that there's going to be no question that something of that nature is probably going to be discussed for 2027. And I think we're all just as committed to trying to reach those goals, lofty as they were, but as quickly as we possibly can. So we'll definitely take a note and look at it for next year.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. And that input is taken. I don't know what that noise is. But I do think it's something that we can hopefully take this year and understand kind of what that need and capacity is, so that we can determine how to broaden that bench into the future, and what that additional, if it's professional services, a staff person, so on and so forth, but to continue to make sure that we have the bandwidth to be aggressive, 100% heard.
All right, we'll move on to the Child Development Fund. This fund was created in 2024 when the town took over the operation and activities of the Elaine's Place daycare facility. It is funded partially by a subsidy from the town, from the general fund, as well as the tuition fees, and management for this fund, for this department, falls under the Community Services Department, this division.
Sure, I'll jump in on the mission. I don't know if Lee is here to talk about the next slide, or if you're going to come up here, Delaney. But for childcare, the mission is to provide exceptional full-time childcare to toddlers ages 1 to 3, fostering a safe, nurturing, and developmentally appropriate environment that supports the well-being of children and strengthens the community by enhancing regional economic stability by offering reliable childcare services. And go to the next slide.
Good morning. For 2026, Elaine's Place would like to continue a project that they started in 2025, which are family events, which have been really great. I think I already spoke to you about this at the general fund meeting. And the parenting tips, as we covered at that meeting, and thanks to Zoe for pointing out that those are required to be provided for the Colorado Shines rating. And it also can help with grants as she writes grants. And we all continue to try to work with regional partners to work on the expansion of childcare since it is always falling short for our residents, unfortunately. They are going to raise their fee, which will be also in line with other childcare centers here in the region. And that felt right, and it will help in the future to reduce that subsidy somewhat as well. And I don't know if I have anything else to add, but happy to answer questions. Leah is busy looking after children right now.
And I had the opportunity of talk to Lisbeth with Mountain Village yesterday, actually, just asking them how their childcare operations are looking, and they are very much in line with our subsidy, our rate structure, as well as the rate structure is very much indicative of the community, the region as a whole, but how they're operating, what that subsidy looks like is very on par with us at the moment. So, if there are any questions? All right,
It's
well,
just really expensive. I mean,
Mhm.
that's like, it just breaks my heart, but
Yep.
thanks.
And we'll continue talking again with our regional partners like Strong Start and Bright Futures of how we as a unit can be still meeting these goals of affordability together and how we should be best doing that for the region. So
If I may, I'm happy to have Leah make time at a future council meeting to come and give an update. It is a small population at her school, but I think as long as things are de-identified, she can give you more data on how many kids are getting the CCP monies and how many families are benefiting from Strong Start money so that they are not actually paying this full price, because it is a concern.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I
Would
think
be
that'd be
helpful.
helpful. See that.
thanks, Delaney.
Okay, we'll move on to the Town Lodgers Tax Fund, which was created exclusively to fund activities related to tourism or marketing of the Telluride community and managing the effects of tourism on the community. Other purposes include, but are not limited to, improving the wastewater treatment facility, acquisition and construction of property for affordable housing, and transportation services. It is funded by the 2% lodgers tax on lodging rentals that became effective January 1st, 2022. This tax was previously collected by the county, and that 2022 is when the town took it over and this fund was created. For 2026, we have $750,000 in the budget in this fund for marketing. Our revenue currently is up 12% compared to 2024 through July. We're recommending a 5% increase from 2024 for the 2026 budget, as we don't have much history on this revenue source. We want to be pretty conservative compared to where we are right now. There is an ending fund balance for 2026 budget of $1.28 million, and the communications division falls under this fund.
So for communications, this comes out of the lodging tax fund, as Kaylee mentioned. Just want to kind of bring it back quickly, as we're not going to touch too much on our partnership with the Telluride Tourism Board, which Kaylee mentioned is partially funded out of this fund. Overall, we are going to be providing them $1.3 million. Our contract goes up to 1.5, but as Kaylee mentioned, as we're still understanding this fund, we want to make sure that we are allocating those funds responsibly. So we are limiting that to 1.3 for our partnership with the tourism board. Moving on from that, looking at our communications and the mission of communications to provide innovative and creative communication solutions through multiple modes, languages, and channels to engage with the community effectively, build trust through transparency, and ensure that vital information reaches residents, businesses, and stakeholders. With that, I'll pass it off to Lindsay, who is online.
Thank you. So our 2026 focuses, one of the biggest pieces is continuing our participation in the CWPP, which is the county's wildfire protection plan. And this will go to inform the town's emergency response plan. So once this founding document is complete next year, we'll be able to really hone in on what the town's emergency response plan looks like, and get that updated, as it hasn't been updated since I came on board, and this role really was started about 3 years ago. So that's a big focus in 2026. Additionally, we'll have the installation of phase 1 of the town's wayfinding, placemaking, and signage project, which doesn't come out of this fund, but it is a $400,000 budget line item, with some rollover from 2025. And we'll see that initial installation in the spring, with fabrication occurring this winter. And then if there's space, we'll look for our phase 1B installation in the fall. And then we'll roll into phase 2 for 2027. This is a multi-year phased approach to installation and overhaul for our wayfinding, placemaking, and signage project. We'll also continue to enhance the town's communication strategies through our bilingual implementation of town council previews and recaps. This will go across multiple platforms. All of our council detail is included in radio, newspaper, social, and then we'll be introducing some new video and some new e-blast communications in 2026 as well. We'll be continuing to advance internal communication tools as well by providing quarterly training for department staff on writing, design, and engagement, and by building an internal photo and video library. This kicked off a bit this year, but we'll be bolstering that training and then that build of the internal library in 2026. The most notable budget adjustments, again, are going to be this adjustment for the phase 1 of the wayfinding, placemaking, and signage project. We'll see a flat spend across our community engagement, software, and website line items. We've decreased as much as we can, again, to maintain this conservative approach, as we really analyze how this fund is going to be changing over time. And then additionally, we're looking to add some support staff to expand our bandwidth and assist in implementing our 360 communication strategy, which has been informed for the last 2.5 years of my time in this role, and building with all of our department heads, and informed by our community as well. So this will include expanded reach on social media, which I know has been a big ask over the last couple of years, but something that we haven't necessarily had the bandwidth to expand with. So that'll be a great addition, ideally, to the team.
Great. Any questions for Lindsay?
And there is a part-time communications coordinator in the 2026 budget.
Thanks, Kaylee.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Great. No questions?
Nope.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, the Airline Guarantee Fund is to support airline services at the Telluride and Montrose airports. It's funded by a 2% excise tax on lodging rentals and sale of food and drinks served or furnished in restaurants and bars. It was effective January 1st, 2024. The town retains a 2% administrative fee, and the remaining is passed through to Telluride Montrose Air Organization. This revenue is currently up 5% compared to 2024, and the 2026 budget is held flat compared to 2024. This fund operates with a 0 fund balance annually. The Conservation Trust Fund is another small fund with not much activity going through it. It's used for state of Colorado lottery funds, which are to be used for parks and recreation services and capital investment. The 2026 expenses are budgeted even to the revenues, which is about $30,000 annually that we get in lottery revenues into this fund. The 2026 ending budgeted fund balance is $147,000. Our open space and affordable housing funds have a similar type of budget where we put all the remaining fund balances into that set aside account to have a 0 fund balance at the end of the budget year for these two funds. The open space fund is used to acquire and maintain spaces and implement projects and programs pursuant to the approved annual work plans and council direction. It's funded by a 5% transfer from the general fund and capital fund of sales and use tax revenues, property tax, motor vehicle tax, business and building license, and real estate transfer taxes. And this was reallocated in 2023. It used to be 20%, and now 15% of those funds have been reallocated to the Reserve Capital Improvement Fund. Lance, anything you want to say on the open?
Yeah, thank you, Kaylee. So the expenditures estimated for this year will be 1.6. And that's 900,000 of that approximately, a little bit under, is associated with the river restoration project that we're completing here in the next week. We're also received a $250,000 grant for that project, which acts to lower the cost. Next year's expenditures will be much lower. Typically, we have a open space work plan that does not include a large project like a river restoration project. That's about 400 to 500,000 a year. And I would estimate that next year will be in the lower end of that range. So right now we're projecting a fund balance of 4.8 million in the open space fund, which will be reduced by the work plan expenses that you authorize when the work plan comes due. That'll probably be early first quarter of next year. So the fund is healthy, and we'll be in next year. We'll be actually adding the revenues coming in are projected to be 965,000. We're not going to be spending that amount, so that'll be actually a gaining fund in the next few years because we're not anticipating a large project. Now, land acquisitions, items like that could come up, and this is the fund that would be looked at to accomplish those goals if those things arise.
I have a quick question about this. If we needed to do any like grading of like beetle kill or anything for like fire mitigation, would that be something that would come out of this fund, or would that come out of something else?
It could come out of this fund, particularly if it's on open space land.
Okay.
And you know, we're sitting in on the processes that Lindsay was referring to as
Right.
well. It'll be interesting to see where the most bang for the buck is and what areas provide the most protection. Certainly we have forests in Bear Creek. The valley floor does not have a lot of forest land.
Right.
The forests that are behind Shandoka and Public Works are not on open space. They're on
Private.
accommodations or public purpose zone properties. There could be a lot of different funding sources that we use for that, depending where the site is. I think that a lot of our projects will be grant fundable in part.
Okay.
So I think once we come up with a strategy of what's the most important priorities, then we can start allocating funds to that. But to answer your question, yeah, if it's on open space, certainly that would be a source.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any more questions? Great, thanks, Lance.
All right, we'll look at the Affordable Housing Fund while Lance is up here. This fund was created for the development and preservation of affordable housing for the town. It's also a healthy fund, right? Funded by taxes, fees, and mill levy. The major revenues consist of 0.5% of that 4.5% sales and use tax, housing mitigation fees, a 2 mil property tax levy effective January 1st, 2019, 2.5% short-term rental excise tax, which took effect in 2020, and then the most recent revenue source, the short-term rental regulatory fee, which was effective starting January 1st, 2024. And again, all additional revenues not spent during the year is budgeted to a set-aside account, making the fund balance zero at year end, and that is about $12 million for 2026. This fund subsidizes projects to keep rents lower than if the full cost of the project was financed. For the short-term rental excise tax, staff is recommending a 5% increase for the 2026 budget over 2024 actuals. We're currently up 19%. And then for sales tax, that same 3% increase compared to 2024, which we have in the general fund as well. We'll let Zoe go over this mission.
So for housing development, our mission is to preserve and improve the town's sense of community by building equitable access to safe, affordable, sustainable housing solutions. Rooted in our commitment to preserving the community, staff strives to create vibrant neighborhoods and housing developments where every resident can thrive. And with that, I'll pass it off to James and Lance.
Thanks. So next year we'll be completing two projects. That will be the Tower House. Well, that's a public-private partnership done by others, but the Canyonlands Tower House project will be completed. Again, that is mostly rental, but there will be for sale deed restricted units that are price capped as part of that project. Virginia Placer 2A will be completed, and we hope to start construction on 2B when we come back to council. We'll be coming back to council with an approach to that project over the winter, and we'll decide at that point whether or not that's a viable project or not, given the hillside constraints. We also intend to complete the entitlements, design entitlements, cost estimation process, financing and development approaches for both the Lot L project and Carhenge. That'll be occurring all next year. That would be a very long planning process. And so that would be a focus on the planning side of the housing that we'd be looking to accomplish next year. Also, we are going to continue to use the new housing needs assessment to inform the housing mixes and the intentions of those housing units, for example, rent versus ownership. We're going to continue to look at land banking opportunities, and we're also going to be looking to incorporate other uses that are not traditional housing into these projects, such as daycare. We're looking at we're going to create gathering spaces to foster community connectivity in these projects, and that can be done through the spaces that aren't the parts of the lots that are not being used for housing. That could be a Carhenge. It could also be on Lot L. We're also looking at looking at daycare opportunities in all these projects. We have a daycare site identified in the Lot L project. We're also looking at creating community serving commercial uses in all these projects as well, to the extent that it's a good fit and the location is suitable. Some projects are really small, like the Virginia Placer projects, probably not looking at incorporating commercial into those projects. So certainly Lot L and Carhenge and those projects would be suitable for that type of use. We also have a goal here to stay responsive to the community's demand for mental health services and collaborate regionally to ensure adequate space and resources, such as dedicated office spaces when available. So that'll be, again, it's kind of in that basket of community serving commercial uses, but it's really community serving commercial uses and public uses. For example, we had added the food bank into the program at Lot L. And that's an example of, it's not commercial, but it's definitely a community serving use. And I think that's about it as far as the construction side and also the planning side and the programming side. What we're seeing here is that we're not looking at housing just as housing, we're looking at housing as community serving uses. And we want to weave into those uses all these other types of things like community serving, commercial, daycare, and so forth.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
And then a new fund created for 2025 is the Virginia Placer 2A fund. From a recommendation from our auditors, we did create a new fund for this, and it will be considered a governmental fund rather than an enterprise fund. We closed on the financing on September 30th for this. Do you have anything else you want to add, Lance?
We invested the COP proceeds
Today
at 8:30 this morning. So what that does is allows us to generate interest income while the project's being constructed, and then reimburse the town at the midway point of the project, at the end of the project. And that will help provide an operational subsidy or an operational reserve going into the project. Again, this is for primarily for town municipal employee uses, which could include on-call, long-term rental, seasonal workers, and also housing needs, such as if we are hiring somebody and we have a place to land that person immediately, rather than waiting for them to find housing in the market. So there's a lot of different purposes this project could fund, and we can also rent it. We're also allowed to rent it long-term to the general public in the event that we do not have municipal needs to fill the facility.
Great. No questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Okay, our last governmental fund is the Transportation Fund, which accounts for operation of town transit operations. It's funded by a transfer from the capital fund and grant revenues. For 2026, the transfer from the capital fund is $900,000. And then CDOT Transit and Rail Grant of $158,000.
And the mission of this division is to provide safe, reliable, courteous public transportation to guests and local commuters and to provide ongoing long-term transportation to the town of Telluride. With that, we'll pass it over to Kyle. He's helping represent
Thank-
Joe.
Yeah, thank you. And my best wishes for Joe. He's on injured leave right now. He fell off his roof, so keep our fingers crossed for him. He shattered his leg, so he's going through surgery. And hopefully for a quick recovery. But yeah, our best wishes out to him and his family. 2026 focuses. The biggest one for me is going to be this Public Works Maintenance Campus addition, which is for the transit division. We received several grants for this particular project, and it's been on hold for the last couple of months. It was released off of that hold, and now we're just awaiting that award. So once we have that award, we can actually get it out to bid, and we can see the associated cost that'll be for that small addition to the east side of our existing public works facility. We'll also be continue supporting the construction of EV infrastructure. As Darren mentioned before, there'll be some of that work going on at the public works facility, working on new transformer install to support the new infrastructure. That way we can really support that EV process. Cause right now we have the EV bus that's currently in the fleet. And then we have one more on its way. So we'll have 2 full EV buses here, hopefully by the end of 2026. We've got our fully EV sweeper that's coming here November, December. And then of course, we're working on kind of the small utility vehicle fleet to transition that into EV as well. Cause after this, the bus being implemented, I had my doubts, but it's totally changed my mindset on EV and a high elevation, cold temperature setting. So it's been very successful, and I'm really pleased with how that EV bus is performing. And then of course, maintain an accident-free year for town transit. No noticeable adjustments, minus really just the salary adjustments for staff. All the other general ledgers remain the same from previous 2025 or 2026.
Great. Any questions for Kyle on transit?
Sorry, this is actually more of a question for sustainability, but the talk about the EV bus infrastructure reminded me of it. I believe in our budgeting last year, after we pulled the public EV charger out of the Silverjack parking garage, we talked about exploring other public infrastructure this year, and I don't think I haven't heard any updates on it. I know that there was limited transformer sites that were available and our options were maybe limited, but I would encourage us to continue to explore it. So I know that's.
Yeah, we received a grant from Charge Ahead to put some more EV infrastructure. We had a contractor that we've been working with that was supposed to get the work done this year, following that direction. And I believe that they were having troubles with that contractor. So the work will most likely be next year at this point, looking at Hayden in the back. So adjusting that work. And they were looking at the sites that we identified. The last time we gave an update to council was the 2 parking areas near Butcher and the Baker. And then on the other side was the hardware store, Ace. So we'll continue to work on that and continue to enhance our EV infrastructure for the town.
Well, and I talked to Darren. There's a transformer kind of on the edge of the Carhenge lot and Cimarron, and I think as we keep figuring out what we want the concept on that site to be, that could be another good spot for something. But that feels a little far in the future.
Yeah, no, and we will continue to find as many as we can, especially in these new developments. And I know some of the EV chargers actually ended up at Public Works, I believe, as well. Oh, and the parks for our own EV infrastructure as well. But for the public, we're working through that grant with the contractor to get that infrastructure out. So thank you for that, allowing us that update. All right, any other questions for Kyle on transit? All right, we'll move on.
Okay, we'll move on to our enterprise funds, which are run more like a business, where they should be self-supporting, where the fees cover the cost to run the utility or the housing project. Our enterprise funds include water and wastewater, parking, and then our 4 housing funds, Shandoka, Virginia Placer, Sunnyside, and Voodoo. And we'll start out with water and wastewater while Kyle's up here. These are both funded through user charges and tap fees, which are paid through the building permit. And then the wastewater fund also has a 35% reimbursement from Mountain Village on capital and operating expenses for the wastewater treatment plant. The most current rate study was completed in 2023, and the recommendation for rate increases from that rate study were another 5% for water for 2026 and 18% again for wastewater. The scope of that project has changed a lot since we did this rate study in 2023. So staff is recommending a 5% increase on both of those, as we know that we do need to continue to build up our reserves to help pay for that project in the future. And I'll let Kyle go over the water, or sorry, Zoe.
No, you're
for the
great. So
water
for our
bill.
water division, the mission is to provide safe, high quality, uninterrupted water utility service in a manner that respects the natural environment and provides exceptional customer service while developing best business practices and motivating its workforce. Passing it over to Kyle.
Sure, thank you. And one thing to step back on, because it's worth mentioning, is we also have a all-electric UTV, which is your all-terrain vehicle for this department specifically because they have to access all their plants. The Mill Creek, Stillwell, Pandora, every day of the year. And for them to be able to transport up there specifically with pouring gas, this is the safest bet. And then to be able to make it happen with all electric is a huge first as well. And that's where one of the chargers was used to set up at the wastewater treatment plant to support that all EV UTV. One of the big projects that's planned for 2026, but definitely want to touch on this, is actually potentially going to occur a lot sooner, is the replacing the existing high pressure fill line to the still water storage tank. I know Dan, you had some questions on that. And so for this this project, what that entails is there's 2 existing lines that go up from Tomboy up to the Stillwell treatment, which supports our main infrastructure for water supply. There's an existing 10-inch high pressure spiral wound pipe and another existing 8-inch that in the past actually had a 4-inch placed in it, pulled through it to help that support. So you currently have a 10-inch and a 4-inch basically filling and draining those tanks for distribution. And the existing spiral wound 10-inch that's there historically has had several leaks in it that luckily our crew has been able to identify and patch. Just within the first 30 feet in the last 3 years, there's been 7 leaks that we were able to track and actually pinpoint and repair prior to those expanding and actually opening it up. Because you can imagine what that would look like if there was a leak within that line. I equate it to what happened over at Telski when that water line went, that erosion that can occur in some of those issues that occur with a pipe leak on a slope like that. So the plan was to complete the design in 2025 and then implement in 2026. But we just discovered another leak that will get repaired, but we're going to put this on the higher priority list. So the intent and what you'll actually see here in the next few weeks is we're going to be installing a rockfall fence 150 feet. So what that rockfall fence will help do is if a leak occurs and does create erosion, at least that'll capture any rocks that could potentially slide down that hill if that pipe were to leak further up. And so we've got a contractor on board, got a geotech already that's completed the design. We get the rockfall fence installed here as soon as possible. So you'll see a spider excavator up there that'll be able to perform the work pretty much off of Tomboy, so it shouldn't restrict any traffic. And then we're trying to figure out how as soon as possible that we can actually excavate and install new it's a DR9, it's the higher pressure rated HDPE high polyethylene pipe that you'll see on the spur right now. We actually had it made, delivered, because there's a long lead time for that item. So we're all set on actually getting the pipe here. We're working with a GJ pipe out of Grand Junction just for specific fittings that we'll need to make this project happen. So what that will do is we'll get the rockfall fence installed. line the contractor up at the gate at Tomboy. And it's you have to have a certified high fuser machine and a certified personnel that can fuse that pipe together. And then we'll run it up from where Tomboy heads up to Stillwell. And then we'll actually drag that pipe. It's 700 feet, and then we'll actually start lowering it through the trench. So once that's installed, we'll be able to reconnect the tank to that line, reconnect the line in Tomboy, and then that'll take that pressure off of the existing the spiral round pipe that's pretty much on the surface. So that'll fix that line, and then we still have the 4-inch. That is the line that we're going to be relying on for fill and draining to actually feed the town. And so the timing of it right now work out as we get head towards the shoulder season for that those lower volumes. That's a good time for if we can install this pipeline. Would be our best option at this juncture. So we're hoping to be able to install a new 10-inch HDPE as well as a backup 6-inch that'll eventually take over the 4-inch line. As you can imagine, the 4 inches reducing that flow. So that's kind of that project in a nutshell. Because I know that is a big project, it's coming up quick. I'll open up for questions on that, and I'll continue through the other items.
Sure, yeah, I'll just hop in, and I don't want to get too off track because some of the topics raised at this Monday's open space meetings are outside of the terms of budget, so I don't want to get too off of that. I think this project is very necessary, and I think we have to do it. Perhaps let's just talk offline on some of those concerns. They're just mostly the Open Space Commission was mostly concerned with visual impacts or potential erosion impacts for it. Sounds like we're thinking about that, but as much as we can mitigate that as possible. Obviously, there's going to be some trade-offs, and I don't want to turn this project into something that would be 8 times more expensive for some of that. Yeah, let's just talk more, Kyle.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then just to kind of touch on a few other items, the rockfall fence that'll be placed up there is all temporary. Will actually be staged. The main one that's going to be 50 feet north of Tomboy. That's the typical rockfall fence. Yes, they are expensive, but it's that looped hard steel concept. It'll span for 150 feet, and then we'll have other rockfall fences that kind of go up the hill as that spider excavator starts to excavate. And then once vegetation is established, then all that goes away. So it's not a forever thing, but we just need to make sure that the pipe gets buried, vegetation is established, it's safe, and then all those safety measures go away.
Yeah, we'll work a little bit more offline on communication and some of these other aspects that Dan, you are in the open space brought up, just to offer more transparency. This is a very necessary emergency repair to maintain that mission that we started this water division discussion on. But it will have a visual impact, as Dan said, because it is the Stillwell right up on the hill. So very similar. While we are trying to avoid what Telsky had to do, there is going to be kind of a visual impact of it for the next until the vegetation takes hold. So just to make that clear.
And did I understand you correctly, Kyle? Just the old pipe would be able to be mostly removed without a complete excavation? You said something about pulling it out. Did I just misinterpret you, or?
Yeah, so the existing spiral wound will actually remain in place because we're actually talking about repurposing that for a drain line for the backwash system up there. That doesn't require burial depth. So we'll actually repurpose that existing 10-inch by running another pipe through it. And then these will be 2 brand new pipes that are offset. So this will it'll be about a 10-foot offset from the existing water fill line to the new proposed 10-inch and 6-inch.
Okay, so the old pipe won't need to be excavated, but the new pipes will be.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any more questions on that before Kyle moves on? Okay, thanks, Kyle.
Moving on, so we'll also be looking at the evaluation repair of the east tank lining. This one is a little bit tricky because there's multiple things we're looking at with the tanks up at Stillwell. These are old CMU tanks with the metal top. And of course, when you have the CMU, they have high risk. Well, it's not just a risk anymore. It has a lot of infiltration. So these tanks have been lined and the liners keep failing. And so we've exhausted kind of our exploring those options, and we really need to look at some different options to either better line those tanks or find a way to remove and replace, or another option to be able to build new tanks within the existing tanks. 'Cause right now, they fail through the state size. And so we have, in 2024, we did major repairs, but the major repairs we're noticing are probably only gonna last for another 5 years. So we have to look at some alternative options. And so 2026 will be really to spend a lot of our effort to look at what those options mean, and then we'll obviously present those findings and try to figure out what that looks like for the future. And just to reiterate, those two tanks, 250,000 gallons each, that is really the main supply into town. Then we have our Pandora tank on the east end that also supplies water to the town. So we do have that redundancy, but we definitely need to keep that infrastructure up and running, because that is key to our water network. And that goes along with upgrading the Stillwell treatment plant to reinstate production approval from the state. We have sanitary checks every couple of years with the state. They come in, they provide the recommendations and requirements for upgrades that need to occur for specific treatment. And so we've been working on those in the last year. So we have several items that we just have to address. It's nothing major, but it's just work you have to perform to keep up with the state regulations. So we'll continue that in 2026. And then constantly upgrading our telemetry, our SCADA system. That's what everything talks throughout town and with our infrastructure. So improving those radio signals, that communication, cybersecurity, all that we'll be working on or continuing to work on in 2026. That way it keeps our systems talking. And then replacing existing pressure reducing valves, the PRVs. I know we've talked about this quite a bit. Just as a refresher, this is really focusing on 3 PRV vault upgrades, one at Mill Creek. The purpose of that new PRV, will reduce the pressure from Mill Creek down to Lawson. So we could help prevent a lot of those series of PRVs that go to the subdivisions, to Lawson, to the plant. It'll overall better serve the network and put a less liability on that, reducing that high pressure line out to Lawson. And then we have one that will replace the existing PRV vault at Tomboy and Oak. And then the other location is Pacific and Davis. And so there will be a small project that'll need to happen right across from their bar, replacing that PRV vault in 2026. That's just kind of digging up the old one. These will be basically all cart prefab system, lower it back in, reconnect, and then we'll be out of there with those PRV vaults.
How long will that take?
So they're in process now. They'll get delivered. We'll go out to bid for a contractor, and then it would be a couple weeks to install those PRVs.
Okay.
And that's gonna be at the same time that's construction's already occurring over there, because that pocket park right at Davis in front of Viking Lodge, there's already gonna be a retaining wall that has to be constructed, landscape that has to occur in 2026. So all that will be timed out, so that work is all happening at the same time.
Thank you.
Accelerating the water meter replacement program. Luckily we've had Corey Booz that has been replacing these meters slowly to not only a different manufacturer, but a different system. We're trying to move more towards the automated where they can read from a vehicle. So it's actually the electric UTV goes around, it picks up the signals from the meters that pulls in the information for billing purposes. And so we're still far behind on getting all those replaced. So we're gonna do an expedited program where we'll hire a contractor to go in and replace all these meters. And of course, that's high coordination with the public getting to these meters, doing that replacement, and then also just trying to time it potentially with obviously the backflow regulations and the certifications of those for basically every property has to do the backflow prevention program, has to have those certified. And so we'll try to time it so we're not in there twice. And that's kind of just to to remind everyone that if you have a backflow, testable backflow, it is your responsibility to get those tested annually. As we all know, we had that compliance letter with the state last year, specifically due to individual properties not doing that certification. And so we're asking everyone, please, if you get a letter in the mail that says you have not received your certification, or we haven't received your certification for your backflow being tested, please take that serious, because the next step, just so everyone knows, is shutting off the water if they're non-compliant, because that's the only way we can protect everyone from that cross-contamination by not having the backflows checked. So that's just a part of what we have to do as a community. So please be accountable and just do that annual test, so we don't have to keep going through this process and reminder. And we appreciate those that are willing and are coordinating with us when they do receive that, open for questions, and anything that people want to bring to our attention in regards to that. But we have a few left for the year, so if you get that letter, please get that scheduled as soon as possible.
And I know Amy and her team are working a lot on that communication. Takes up a lot of their time. So, they're trying to be very engaged with the public on that. And I think this goes out to our lodging community as well, where that's some of the disconnect on some of these pieces as well. So thanks to the team for working on that.
Yeah, thank you. And we understand, the importance of rentals. But it is the property owner's responsibility to have those certified. So I get it, like, it's not always ideal, but it's your responsibility to figure out when to get that certified. And so please do so before, to prevent from having the water being shut off. Finishing Pandora, Cornet Creek, Mill Creek, water treatment plant upgrades from 2025. We just got a laundry list of items that require maintenance. And we're trying to tackle all those. We got a lot done in 2025, but we still have a lot to do that's going to extend into 2026. Upgrade the water master plan, water efficiency plan, and resilience plan. That all correlates to our water CAD plans that we're trying to put together, and our radio signal for telemetry. All that falls into place with these plans. And so we're just trying to get those locked down, hire third-party contractors to assist to not drag this out. So we'll continue on those documents and get those updated as soon as possible. Hopefully complete those in 2026. And then Stillwell water tank rehab, we've kind of already talked about that. Really looking to come up with a conceptual concept on how we're gonna fix those tanks up at Stillwell. For 2026, the majority of the general ledger accounts did not see an increase. General ledger amounts associated with oil, gas filters, insurance, and maintenance were increased slightly higher than the line in 2023 and 2024. And then audited actual 2025. I know it's weird to see the oil, gas filters, but we do have our generators that support these facilities. And so that's another plan that we have to put in place for that maintenance on getting those serviced. They require a lot of service nowadays, and it's got to be a certified individual that can do that. And so that's kind of a change in cost that we'll have to see annually to keep those generators up and running. And then as we get closer to being fully staffed, we have obviously the training that's associated with that, as well as our PPEs and the clothing allowance for those departments.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. Any questions on the water division? I think he thoroughly was ahead of any of your questions. So thanks for that.
And with all those capital projects, we're using $3.9 million of reserves, which are from a $5 million COP issued in 2024, leaving an ending fund balance of in 2026 of $1 million. And I'll let Kyla or Zoe go to the
Let's put on to our wastewater division. The mission is to provide safe, high quality, uninterrupted wastewater utility service in a manner that respects the natural environment, provides exceptional customer service while developing best practices and motivating the workforce. So very similar to water. Passing it off to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So some of the 2026 focuses, obviously continuing our regional collaboration and design with our wastewater treatment solutions that meets the long-term needs of the Telluride region, including the comprehensive assessment of the current and future demands site design evaluation, and integration of the advanced treatment technology. Updating the 2011 wastewater master plan in coordination with the town's new master plan. Support installation of the infrastructure for the sewer collections for Society Turn. Construct new influent pump station. This is by far the most important one that we're currently in design, and we've got to work on getting this implemented as soon as possible. This is really currently the heart of that whole infrastructure. This is where all of the wastewater gets collected and then actually gets pushed into the wastewater treatment plant. Right now, the existing infrastructure, we're having issues with the HVAC. 2 weeks ago, the compactor actually broke in there and we can't find any replacement parts for it. So we don't have a compactor when the material comes up to get screened. Now it's just coming out soupy and the staff just has to deal with this mess instead of it being compressed, dewatered. And then that way it's easier to manage when sending it to the dump. So they're just having to deal with that until we come up with a new plan and reconstruct this raw water lift station, which we're now calling the influent pump station. This is also where all of the fat, oil, and grease, the fog gets collected. And so the last 2 weeks, staff has been spending about 2 hours a day. There was 1 4-hour day hauling this fog out of this sump. And what that involves is a 5-gallon bucket that's perforated, and you're physically lifting up the bucket where it dewaters and then dumping this out. And we just weighed it last week and it was 1,000 pounds of fog. So we still have a major issue in town with the grease interceptors not being compliant, not working. And this is really, it's really all the community. So it's not just Telluride, it's not just Mount Village. So we just ask those to continue to get those pumped out. Do your best to minimize and eliminate anything being dumped down the drain that's not supposed to, just to help our folks out at the plant. Because what that does is when the fog, not only is it high maintenance, but then once it gets into the plant, it really ruins the whole process. You get these filaments that destroy the bugs that are supposed to help with the process. So just asking the community to continue to, minimize what we're putting down the drain. That's not supposed to go down there.
Sorry, really quickly on that. We did have a big public information push on that last year, and seems like we're not quite hitting our targets on that one. So I would raise that we maybe need to consider.
We can do an information push. The main things that are helping a little bit further, we do have a new FTE pre-treatment coordinator that's supposed to be helping with that. More on the boots bandwidth to audit and look at the grease traps and get them understanding what that compliance is. And then we'll continue the communication pushes as well on that.
Yeah, glad we're putting more resources to it, because my point was that the public information doesn't seem quite sufficient.
It's not, no. And we can keep telling everyone, please do better, but really it's working with our restaurant partners to make sure that their equipment is up to our standards, and then checking again to make sure that they actually have done it, and then checking it again. So
Staff spent a lot of time. So they go out, we were just out last week going to restaurants, testing the equipment, talking with staff. So they've been spending a lot of time. And we appreciate all those that are willing to listen and help, helping us and walking through to understand, the process. So we appreciate all those that are attempting to comply, and we'll just continue to do better.
Do you think like any of this problem is residential, or is it so I feel like what you guys just explained was more of the commercial problem, but I wonder if there's more that we could be doing on the residential side.
Yeah, we have, and it's all the above. It's residential as well, because when you're dumping any grease down the drain, when the garbage disposal, it's like, that's the easiest way to just, rinse out your plate and put it down the drain. That's also contributed to this. So definitely with the residential, I know we have some catering businesses out of residential that send a lot of food processed down, the drain. So we're just asking those to be aware and do their part as well. Even though it's residential, it's a smaller volume, but it all adds up. So it definitely contributes. So asking those in residential to be a part of the solution as well.
Are we?
I think, yeah, to your point, for resources and impact, it is better, we're focusing on commercial. We'll do these communication pushes for residential, as they are definitely part of the problem, but a much smaller part of the problem. So the focus is to get a handle on those that have the largest impact, and that will have the largest benefit to the plan.
Yeah. I wonder, like, when we've talked about some information and education, if and when we do implement a more widespread composting system, like, I wonder if this information could be on the same, like, card or magnet or whatever we end up doing. Like, they sort of feel like,
I love that idea.
I mean, it's occurring in the same.
Sure. Don't
space.
throw it down the sink, put it in the compost.
Right,
That
right.
this is
So I feel
beneficial
like-
for two reasons.
Yeah, I know that that also is a little into the future, but I feel like those two information outreach,
Synergies.
Yeah.
there's some cohesion there. So just kind of flagging that as maybe a future effort.
And the other thing that we're gonna need to figure out the solution as well is because we had a solution in the past is the fryer grease. There's an individual from Norwood who would come and collect it and make biodiesel out of it. So it was kind of, you never had to deal with it before. Now, my understanding is that individual passed away. And so that is no longer in place. So there's no one coming in town collecting that. So that's something else that we'll be working with Darren and trying to find out some options of how we can continue that effort of collecting that versus that just being dumped down the drain.
That's cool.
Moving on, and then just for the 2026, the majority of the general ledger accounts did not see an increase. Majority change in the department's expenditures pertains to biosolid disposal. So this goes back to the redundant screw press that we're currently constructing. And so this is that final product that has to get hauled off. And this material is being hauled off for composting. So we've got that dialed in, which is absolutely fantastic. But for 2025 and 2024, this was really an issue because we didn't have a CDL driver. We had a 1-ton truck with small trailers where we were having to haul pretty much every day of the week. And it required a CDL A license. And so we received our new hook lift truck where we're cutting those trips in half. And so we should be able to see those improvements in 2026 because we won't be making as many trips and we won't be relying on the third parties to help pick up and haul off, as we should be able to do majority of that internally. We are still looking for a CDL driver operator for one of the vacancies. And so once we can fill that, we will be able to better align and really have a cost savings associated with that haul of the biosolids to Delta. And then of course the expenditures as we continue to fill our vacancies with training, PPEs, and then of course with the increase in salary. So not a huge increase to that general ledger, but there will be a minor percent increase.
Any additional questions on wastewater? Great. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Run away.
Scott. Moving on to the parking enterprise fund, which is used for parking related expenses, including signage, meters, debt on the Silverjack garage, more. It's funded by town parking meter fees, parking permit fees, Silverjack parking fees, and parking fines. For the 2026 budget, we have budgeted the revenues pretty conservatively, hoping that they'll come in higher than that. There's a $500,000 capital for Lot L, and the ending fund balance for the 2026 budget is $92,000. And Hayden's here to say, do you have any questions?
Is that revenue for Lot L, is that from the non-government partners that also utilize it? Or how do we collect that fund?
That's an expenditure.
It's an expense.
Oh, I just saw it under
It is
revenue.
under
So I
major
missed-
revenues.
So-
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, and that was for planning for the proposed parking structure on that. Okay, thank you. that makes way more sense. I was like, is there a revenue that I just haven't been aware of for 4 years?
Be nice.
Okay, no questions. Right, thanks, guys. We're doing rental housing.
Don't go anywhere
Don't
yet.
go anywhere.
Go.
I got my notes.
Oh, okay. Move on to the housing funds. And let's see here. In the budget, I have included the revenues with the 9% AMI increase. And then as a recommendation from the Finance Advisory Group, we've also done a cash flow model with 3 different models. One being no increase in rents from 2025, one at the 9% increase, and one at a reduced multiplier of 27% for all of the funds other than Shandoka. No, 25.
Shandoka's 25, all other are 27. And I'm just gonna thank you for that introduction, Kaylee, and I'll add to it. So the purpose of this discussion is very strictly for our budget. In order to understand how council would like to see this moving forward in 2026 is how we will be putting it into our budget. Should any of these discussions be different than what is currently in the rental housing policies, which is that 9% increase at the current multiplier of 30% / 27% for some of those Shandoka units, we would then have to have additional conversations and work sessions and actions to update the rental housing policies. But that will come at a later date. So this is specifically to have that direction. I do thank Hayden and Delaney for creating that additional memo of insight and modeling, and I will pass it off to them after I read the mission to lead us through this discussion. So the mission of our rental housing division is to support the local residents who make up our workforce with safe, well-maintained, and sustainable housing opportunities. We strive to introduce and foster additional services to enhance the well-being of the individuals within our community. Go to the next slide. All right, we'll pass it off to you. I don't know if you want to quickly just touch on some of the other aspects before we get into the bigger discussion.
Sure, thank you. There's a delay on YouTube Live
Oh.
just upstairs, so sorry for that panic moment when I wasn't here. It has been an interesting year, and we have been meeting with as many tenants as possible on an individual basis. We would like to have a more concerted effort going into 2026 to have public forums, for lack of a better term, where we can invite tenants or prospective tenants so that we can actually show them how you go through the application process, explain in more detail how some of these policies work. Staff is already working on some items like a video, sort of a mock-up of how you fill out an application and what are the really helpful points to present your information in such a way that you can set yourself up for success with your rent rate and ongoing qualification. We're very excited to offer a couple of those going into this next year, 2026. We, as Zoe mentioned, our later discussion will touch on some rental housing policy amendments that we would like to present to council and have it considered by council. There can be, I believe, later on a bigger in 2026 dive into those policies with the understanding that when they were approved, we would look at them for amendments and necessary edits at least every 2 years, if not more frequently. We think the first survey that we did last year, the annual tenant survey, was successful. It gave us data points to help focus on problem areas, so to speak. And we would like to do that again this coming year. And we're hoping to encourage more people to reply so that we have a better data set from tenants. And we are about to embark in about less than 2 weeks on phase 2 of the window replacement project at Shandoka A through E buildings for better or worse, that is being pushed into a phase 3 in 2026, which is under the notable budget adjustments for 2026. The cost was it was higher than we anticipated, and we were flat out told that they were applying tariff costs to our order. So we did have to split it into a third phase. And I think that is about it, unless anyone wants to ask any questions.
I'll just quickly add before the questions that we talked about this FTE in our general fund because a portion of this FTE, but we did add a new facilities position that will also be taking account of some of these rental housing enterprise funds as well. With that adding.
I think the other thing that I'd like to see, I know you were talking about doing some educational sessions, but I think it makes sense for us to develop an advisory committee of individuals that are living in our rental and ownership deed restricted programs so that we can get some more real-time responses from the people that are experiencing our policies and our actions. So I don't know if that's something, I mean, I obviously want to throw that to the council and make sure that that's something that we feel that everybody feels would be beneficial to the people that are living there as well as our staff. I'm just going to kind of open that up to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little offline about this, and I think that the more input that we can get from people in our housing program is better. Like, I don't think there's any reason to not try and engage more people and have more direct channels of communications with people living in the housing program. I feel like it might, having some of those conversations consolidated to an advisory committee might make the communication more efficient. We've received a lot of public comment and community input about our rental policies. And I think if we can sort of fine tune how we are communicating back and forth with people in our housing program, it might just help the overall conversation. So I'm curious what that would look like. I think we need to be thoughtful of not overlapping too much with what the housing authority does. Like, they need to sort of have intentional spaces that they fill and not too much redundancy. But I think it's an interesting concept that we should explore.
And I think to your point, I think that's exactly it. I think that the advisory committee should inform the authority versus what we've been doing right now. I don't think it's been effective. And Teddy, you've got your hand raised, so I want you to be able to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea to have that step and just more input. It's really important as we, have gotten our feedback in the last year or two on a lot of the changes that we've made. And in addition to that, in 2026, I'd like to try to direct staff to, work on getting additional information on peer communities and how they have their housing authorities set up and how the board is in terms of council members, staff members, members of the general public, what seats they represent in terms of, are they owners, are they tenants on the rental side and things like that. I want to make sure that as we look towards the future, that the THA is comprised of the most effective and efficient ways that make, solid decisions, but get all the input possible in the best ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Teddy's point, we've been fortunate that we have always had people that fit in those roles, whether they live in a rental unit or they own a deed restricted unit on THA. But I think that's been like a happy set of circumstances and not something that's been planned. And I think we need to be a little bit more strategic and make sure that we're adhering to what those statewide goals are too. So.
Not much to add, of course, support gathering more input from our constituents and making sure that their voices are heard. I have a small degree of skepticism that the working group is perhaps the answer. It is a little bit of pulling teeth, get people to show up to some of these meetings and devote that kind of time. So I'm not saying no to that, but I also want to remain flexible if that feels like it's not getting the data and the results and the input that we want. So other surveys or other more sort of direct communication, those should be options we explore or have at least in our back pocket should that proposal not yield the results we would be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I
I-
think we need all sorts of different
All of
types
the above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Communication
'Cause
channels.
I think the people who might not be filling out the surveys might be running into their I'm going to call them a representative, but whoever sits on that board at, the trash and complain about their, fill in the blank and that will get back to us in a way that it might not otherwise if that person isn't inclined to fill out a survey. I think it's just adding like one more channel of connectivity into the program. And I think I know this is all really conceptual, but I think it would be great to have at least a representative from every project. Like, I think it's important that, because the issues at Sunnyside are different than the issues at Shandoka are different than those at Voodoo. So I think it's really important if we do this, that we make sure that we're getting voices from all of those projects.
Agreed. Awesome.
Okay, I'm gonna just quickly jump in. So I have, that's kind of outside of this, but obviously it's tied to budget, adding 2 additional goals to our goals and objectives for next year. One, to look to establish a resident advisory committee composed of representatives from town managed housing projects to strengthen communication, promote resident advocacy, and ensure resident perspectives are integrated into the town's decision-making processes. Do you have any comments on that, Delaney? Okay. And then another goal, to explore, comparable communities, housing authorities, to research and evaluate the structure, composition, and operational models of comparable community housing authorities to ensure the Telluride Housing Authority governance, representation, and functions effectively align with the goals of the board and the needs of the community.
Perfect.
That's ChatGPT, by the way. Great. Okay, we will add those. Moving on.
Oh, Geneva, sorry, you've got your hand raised.
Sorry, I really like everything that everyone suggested and I wanted to weigh in and give my thumbs up as well. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. All right, we'll get the slides back up. Or are we done with
I don't have any
slideshow?
more
Okay,
slides.
perfect. Well, thank you for covering that high level piece. And now we will dive into the 3 options presented or asked to be presented from the Finance Advisory Group. Again, it is looking at what our current rental housing policies are, which is a 9% AMI increase. As you saw in your packet, this was the increase that was presented from the state. Then looking at a 0% increase, and I'll pass it to staff of kind of the pros and cons of that. And then looking at the multiplier shift, but keeping a 9% AMI increase. So I'll pass it off to Hayden and Delaney, who did a lot of work on this. So thank you.
Sure, I'll give a little bit of background narrative of how this kind of came about. So with the policy changes in 2024 going to 25, the area median income is now a direct reflection on the rents we use in town. And so last year there was a large increase of 10% increase in AMI. And typically you don't see back-to-back years of huge increases. But this year there was a 9% increase to stack that 10%. And so while that does not technically mean a 9% rent increase across the board, that does change the median rent that then is the foundation for all of the other rents. And so with that 9% increase, what you see is folks moving up and down the AMI ladder. So some people might go down a tier, some people might stay in the same tier. And typically if you stayed in the same tier, that did mean you were seeing some type of rent increase. And so with that information during the budget committee, we discussed options of how to tackle that, whether you adopt a different AMI than what is being driven for the area, or you can amend the multiplier that is used for each property. The cleanest option that we kind of formulated was amending the multiplier, because then you're not changing the area median income, you're just changing how you multiply it into the final rent number. And so with that, we did some modeling to see what all those implications were, how much what was the average percent of income going towards rent, pre-change, post-change, if nothing changed. And then from that, in the back, you'll see cash flow models kind of signaling what those do to the overall budget. So that's kind of the how we got here, and I'll pass it over to Delaney to dive into the hard numbers.
Oof, okay. Thank you so much to Hayden. He did a lot of the heavy lifting with the financial part. You all were here last year and we did modeling for each property separately and had about 4 to 6 scenarios for each property. We tried to hone that down a bit this year to make it as logical and as simple as possible. I think Hayden did a great job describing this to everyone. Just as a quick overview, and this is also for the listening public, if there's anyone listening. When the policies were put into place on November 19th, 2024, they took effect January 1st, 2025. It was determined by council that we should allow for ranges going from tier A at specific properties all the way up to tier J to give an opportunity to existing tenants who already lived in our properties to have the opportunity to stay. Because we did have a few outliers that were up towards the higher end. There was also concern mentioned about being able to not only survive, but thrive and have those opportunities for growth. And ultimately what we were directed to use were 20% ranges for each of the separate tiers that gave people the ability to grow. The multipliers that were put into effect, 27% for the older Shandoka buildings and 30% for everyone else, did not potentially foresee the fact that if you think about someone's housing costs being 30% of their income, it should really include utility payments as well. Presenting you with these 3 separate options, either just doing the straight 9% increase across the board pursuant to the policies, doing a 0 increase, or doing the 9% increase with reducing the multipliers, touches on that ultimate goal of having people's housing costs actually be no more than 30% of their income when you include the utilities. We did add a table, thanks to Allie, she helped put this in here. One of the other messages that we heard last year was not having people pay the exact same amount for apartments or townhomes that were of better quality, either newer or they had amenities such as washers and dryers in the units, or 2 assigned parking spaces and a storage unit, a multiple varied set of amenities. So the rent structures this year were also complicated in that way, that we address those wishes of council. Allie had created a unit amenities multiplier table that you would see in the memo that outlines, at least in 2 buildings, not all buildings, what that would look like. And the piece that we really felt was the strongest argument to potentially continue this is when there is a substantial addition of square footage in an apartment, and it actually gives you quite a bit more livable space. So digging into the various scenarios. If we were to keep things status quo and do no increase, we wanted to alert you to the table about the annual rent increases compared to AMI increases over the years. This information was also included in several memos last year as the policy discussions were taking place. And we wanted to put this in here to show you how the rent structures previously had fallen behind over the years. And if we were to, and this is all budgetary, we're just talking numbers here. If we were to do a 0 increase, and Hayden can speak to this a little better because he was really in depth with the numbers, it will create an infinite horizon of not being able to necessarily catch up, and there will be a deficiency or a shortfall of revenues at almost all of the properties, which will require extensive subsidies from potentially the Affordable Housing Fund for an unknown period of time. And 1 or 2 properties in particular, there was no end date that we could find. Is that pretty accurate?
Yep. As you guys know, as construction costs and costs to do work in town continue to increase, by doing no increase at all, you now lag behind just the basic just functions of town government. So if you do nothing at all, obviously that doesn't mean that every year is nothing, but this year in particular, you would just create kind of the new baseline as behind just the cost of doing business.
And I'll just kind of jump in because I think it was helpful that you did put in the memo just the historic rent increases to AMI changes. And part of where we are today is the lack of some of these consistent aligned increases. And that was a helpful table. So thank you.
If there's no questions, we could go to the next scenario.
You know, I think, would you mind just restating, I think that original decision to go to this model in regards to spending 27 or 30% of your income on housing. It was based on a decision to try, you mentioned that to try and keep everybody with housing stability, to know that they were able to stay in their units, should they desire to stay in their units, if that was their primary concern. If we hadn't gone that route, if we had decided to simply adhere to our existing policies as they were written and as we were supposed to be following them, how many people would have been out of compliance and been required to move or come into compliance?
We're getting a bit off track
just wanted-
because there's other alternatives. It wasn't those 2 options and nothing else. We could have taken.
I just want to make sure though, because I actually think that we need to be looking at these policies again, but I just want to make sure that we're all in alignment on that. And we don't have to answer the question if it feels too, but I just think it's an important data point.
I just reject the premise. I don't think that those were our only options. They're still not our only options. And so it feels a little irrelevant.
How many people were out of compliance? Let's just go there.
At the Shandoka properties, it was approximately 55% of the population that lived at Shandoka were out of compliance with the policies or guidelines that were in effect at the time. The other notable point was at Sunnyside, which was the first property to introduce the idea of tiered rent. We had, I think it was 39%. Sorry, I didn't expect that, so I didn't have the exact number. I think it was 39% of those households were pushed into tier 2 because there were only 2 tiers and the gap between tier 1 and 2 was quite vast. And they were struggling with affordability. It wasn't that they didn't qualify, but I think it touches a little bit on your question.
Perfect, thank you.
Great.
Okay. So the next option that we did present was to simply follow the policies as they were adopted, which, again, a little bit of a background here. Our calendar year also mimics the town's budget cycle. It's the financial calendar is the calendar year, January to December. The AMI numbers from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is where they come from, HUD, those come out in the spring of every year in an effort to not complicate things even further and in an effort to know in advance how the budget would look. We were directed to use the prior year area median income or AMI numbers. So current year 2025, we're actually using the numbers from 2024. In 2026, we will be using the 2025 numbers. As Hayden said, in 2025, the AMI numbers increased 9%. Nobody expected that. We anticipated maybe 4% when we did our projections. If we were to apply the policies as adopted, that would be applying the 9% increase of AMI. So theoretically, and basically technically, all rents at each tier level would go up 9%. However, because the AMI increased 9%, it also means that tenants have more buying power I think that's a good way to say it. Their AMI levels, as Hayden touched on, they actually have expanded that range. And so if they were right on the cusp of going into tier E, they're going to be staying in tier D because it gave them more opportunity because it expanded the range. So not everyone's rent would go up 9%, but if there are people hovering just over the edge in a higher tier, they may end up staying in that higher tier and their rent could go up 9%.
Yeah, I can dig in a little more too. So as I was saying earlier, the 9% doesn't directly correlate to 9% increase across the board for everybody. In doing the data, you can see that a lot of folks who were kind of on that cusp of a tier, and again, it's important to note that with the tiers being a 20% range, if you were at 22%, you dropped. If you're at 34%, you stayed in your same tier and saw an increase. In some situations, people who are in the higher tier saw as much as a $600 decrease in rent. And then there were some folks who saw between $70 and $30 increases. An interesting data point to keep track of is the percent income that we're paying. So in 2025, the average is about 27%. And with the 9% increase, it went up to about 27 or 27.8% to 28%. So while there's a 9% increase of AMI, it was a 1% across the board increase on an average because of people moving up and down their tiers. And again, like I said, it's not as clear cut as saying everyone saw an increase, everyone saw a decrease, because there's so many different data points in those tiers.
So before we put these policies in place, like what was the average rent percentage of household income?
In 2024 is 14%.
So people were paying 14% on average of their income. Okay. And so I think my one concern about AMI is because it is kind of taking into account everything in the region. And we do have people, and I think we saw that with HUD's report and even in our housing analysis report, that a lot of income was now coming from passive income investments, et cetera. And I don't tend to think that is our residents that are in our housing units. And so have we done an AMI analysis for like what's happening in our housing versus what's happening in the region so that we can kind of maybe track more to like what those people are really needing?
I think the important thing to keep track would be, did everybody in our housing see a 9% raise, right? Because that'd be the only true test of knowing where everyone falls on the AMI kind of ladder. Without doing every renewal this year, there's no way of knowing where they were this year versus last year. And then if you didn't have the benefit of being in housing last year, you're joining this year, there is no data set to know if your income changed. But what we did do with the data that we did have, there was about 100 renewals we'd gone through for this data set, a little more than 100. And so you can see basically those folks changing across the AMI table, and a lot of them did change very much. Which is why they did go down in tiers.
Okay.
But again, people who were renewing toward the back half of this year, if they got a 10, 12, 13% raise, they would be a part of this AMI shift.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mian. Yeah, I actually do really agree with you here. During our debate, I dug into it, and I actually dug into it more on the methodology that HUD uses for this data. And I think some of your concerns are reasonable. I also, as far as I can tell, HUD actually uses a completely different definition. They are actually collecting the median family income, not area median income. And that is based off of 4 persons families using the census definition of families, which is people you are related to by birth, marriage, or adoption. And we are using a household income, so unrelated income earners lumped into one. So I think we are looking at different data sets. As I said in the policy debate last year, and did find more data and information from HUD to support, they are only looking at 4-person families. So typically 2 parents and 2 children, and then using multipliers to get to 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, et cetera, household sizes. So all of that does give me a great degree of concern and skepticism that the data set that we are using as the foundation of the system accurately represents the on-the-ground lived experience of our tenants. So yes, I support certainly exploring further, does this data that we're using as the foundation accurately represent our citizens and their lives?
Okay. So thanks for journeying down the rabbit hole with us about that. But I think that that's a really important point to, I think moving forward, I think AMI, I mean, the country uses AMI as its standard, and that helps because then we can really look at ourselves and truly compare from destination to destination, project to project, et cetera. But I do think that these communities, that we may need to in the future start figuring out a new way to evaluate who we actually are serving and what they need. So I would like us to try over the next year to really look at like what AMI or what that data point is going to really need, like how we can look at that in a way that actually serves our community. I think AMI is still like, we should still always use that as a data point, but I think we need to look at specifically what our residents like in our projects are. And then I think there's the other side of it is, which is what my concern was during our debate, was that we have so many people living below our standard 100% AMI in free market housing. And how do we actually serve those individuals, because they are maybe more in need of that housing than people that are on the top end in the housing. So I'd like to just like say that now. And that's obviously, that because this came up during finance.
Not to get too deep into the rabbit hole, but can I ask a clarifying question? I'm trying to take notes on the data points you're seeking. Are you looking specifically for an analysis simply of where people fall in the AMI scale, or are you looking for types of income? Because you brought up passive income potentially skewing.
No, and that was really more just because there are people that live here and work remotely, or people that live here and have retirement accounts that they're living on, or family trusts, et cetera. Like, I just think that income is kind of that it's just more. It's more than people make here. And so what I would like to see is what like our actual workforce is making, because those are the people we're trying to serve.
So we do.
Are you wanting an AMI of our actual lived tenants, right? So you have who is the average, rather than doing 100% AMI as the regional average, 100% AMI would be 100% of our current tenants, and that be the AMI, and then build up that. Is that everything kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and there's a whole significant portion of our population that is living in the free market, but living below our like what we say is our target AMI. So I'm like opening up a can of worms here, but I think if we could start with just saying like the people that live in our buildings, in our housing, like what do they actually make? And then I'd like to just see where that correlates to like what HUD is reporting as our AMI. And it may be just, it may take a year, maybe just on renewals that we say like, okay, this is what we know everybody is.
Yeah, we're collecting a lot. Most of this, I think what you're asking for, I think we're already collecting, we're collecting all the income data and the sources from which it comes from throughout the lease renewal process. So it's not, I don't hear you asking for anything different than what we're already collecting, but Delaney looks very skeptical. So I'm also open to hear staff.
And I'll just jump in. I think we just need more time to collect that data to have these year-over-year comparisons. And the fact that our residency is so fluctuating that we'll just have to come up with broader assumptions of how we're getting these data points to make these kind of bigger pieces.
And it may just be snapshot in time, right? Like it may be like, okay, HUD comes in, the report comes in April 1st. Okay, so April 1st every year, this is when we take a snapshot of like who is living in our housing and this is what they make. And yeah, like we know this is going to fluctuate and it's going to change, but we just need to kind of like start somewhere. And if that data isn't perfect the first time, second time, hopefully by the third time we'll have refined it. But I think we really just need to wrap our heads around like what is actually kind of happening. Because I think to see like 10%, 9%, like these like massive jumps, I don't think like in my experience, like I just don't think that our employers are jumping that much in income. And so, and what they're paying their employees. And so that to me speaks to the fact that what we saw in our housing needs analysis was that that there was a group of people that were making so much money, livable money from outside sources, like that maybe the HUD numbers aren't necessarily representing who we're trying to represent. They're accurate, they're totally accurate numbers, but I don't know that they serve our purpose. And so I just want to make sure that we're keeping in mind that as the destination changes, like we're changing our analysis to reflect what our actual ultimate goals are, which is the affordability for our workforce.
Well, and you kind of touched on this, but I hear where you're coming from, but I do want to be careful to not leave out important data of people who are on our waiting list who would love to be in our housing program, but aren't going to be in that data collection. So I think there is like a little bit of I don't want to rely too heavily on just the people who are actually in our system, because that's not necessarily who we're trying to house. It's just who's
In there now.
made it, and yeah, maybe staying in it, but not necessarily our target tenant either. Like, I think we can acknowledge that our target tenant is on the lower end of these tiers, not necessarily the higher end.
I don't agree with that statement, but that's a different can of
Jay,
worms.
like I've agreed to these, but I don't think that's who are, yeah, maybe we just disagree on that. But I want to make sure that we're not also looking at skewed data, because it's just the people who are in our housing program. And I also wanted to bring up like maybe a more useful data set would be like from employers. Like, I don't even know if that's something we can ask for, but like if we can ask some of the major employers, like, how are you paying your employees like 9% more?
I think that, I mean, and that was sort of my point, is like the like people that are below 100% that are living in free market. I agree.
Mhm.
Like, I think that, but I think we have to start somewhere, and we know that we've kind of got clean data within our housing. And then I think we probably could expand it. And I think that's maybe a conversation through like our business development group. We can certainly start talking to employers and see if they'd be willing to share that in a way that allows them to protect their own numbers as well.
Yeah.
So I think, but I agree, like, I think we just have to start, we have to look to our goal, what we're trying to do, and then maybe start having to reverse engineer some new calculation modeling so that we're achieving our goal the way we want to. And I think to your point, I think we should be serving everybody, to be honest, because affordability is an issue for anyone who cannot afford a $1.6 million condo, which is what what studios and 1 bedrooms are going for right now. And so I think that whole range needs to be served. We just need more housing, because really at this point, it's everybody that needs us to be providing stable housing for them. And I think that's a conversation. That's a bigger conversation, but let's start with maybe collecting some data and then maybe seeing where the holes are in the data that we still need and going after that data in other ways.
I think this is a great conversation point and great direction for staff for future development and analysis as we continue to hone in on these policies. I'm going to bring us back to the budget discussion. And where we left off on the scenarios. Was there any, because remind me where we are.
Around 9% increase. So what that does from a finance standpoint, if you look at the budget impact section of the staff report, you'll see that almost all the properties continue to increase their revenue sources, and most of them are cash flowing. Voodoo in its infancy would still need some type of subsidy from the reserves of Voodoo, not in housing, but from Voodoo, the reserves, to help break even. And then, as I said, Shandoka and Sunnyside will start generating a small surplus. Virginia Placer will nearly break even, which brings up a discussion for a future point of the boarding house. That's part of the funding mechanism of that debt model. And so being proposed also is kind of a revamp of how that kind of works as well, to make sure that the revenue sources from that are contributing toward that model. And that is the summary of 9% increase with no changes. And to segue off and talk about how maybe the 30% isn't a reflection of our folks here, the 9% AMI adjustment with a multiplier reduction probably does speak more to what we're talking about how the folks here have a different lived experience than what HUD thinks the folks here have. So rather than doing just a generic 30% household income, you can start bringing that number down to reflect also the other burdens of groceries and just living in the town of Telluride. And so being proposed was reducing the 30% multiplier, all the other properties, to 27%, then reducing Shenandoah to 25%. And I'll let Delaney dig into that, and then I'll step in where needed.
And before you do, I'm just gonna also, Voodoo in particular, or some of our other newer properties that were financed given certain assumptions on how we were going to tier the units, as this policy has impacted that original onset of our how we modeled the debt out, specifically in Voodoo, when we look at making it meet our rental housing policies at this juncture, there is a financial impact to that. So it's not necessarily about the origination of that fund, but more how we are now trying to fit these policies into these newer projects. So I want to kind of provide that clarity, as well as they modeled out the rental housing policies. We basemented Voodoo at near a tier D for the purposes of this modeling. Because that's the majority of everyone would meet that. And it does bring down a number of people's rents that are in higher tiers at this point, but their income matches a lower tier. I don't know if we want to touch on that piece, but it impacts a lot of what we're talking about. So I want to make sure that's honed in on.
To carry forward Zoe's comment, I think it is important to also point out when the policies were adopted, several properties had that basement level bottom tier. For example, Virginia Placer Apartments and tiny homes, the lowest possible tier is tier B. And at Sunnyside, the lowest possible tier is tier C. And that was directed in probably the largest part due to the financial modeling for those buildings. They're newer, they still have fresh bond issuances assigned to them. And in order to meet the debt obligation and operations and maintenance, those were determined to be the basement tiers. For Voodoo, as Zoe said, we're suggesting tier D. Currently at Voodoo, with the numbers that were prescribed, I guess is a good way to say it, by the state as part of the grant, they are tier D. That is the basement at Voodoo currently. So it wouldn't be changing anything. It would just be keeping it in pace with what the state dictated in the grant.
So for those grant assisted units though, and there are two sets of units within Voodoo, grant assisted and non-grant assisted units. Sorry to bring us to the philosophical part of this a little bit. I know we're in a budget meeting, but I remember very explicitly, very clearly, the phrase of equity getting used by the rest of council amongst this debate of the idea that there should be multiple income units at every project, and that each project should be accessible to every qualified tenant within the town. I am okay with setting a floor, but I also have massive problems with the entire system, as I've clearly stated many times. I do just want to call out that sort of contradiction within our thought process here and hear your thoughts on it, because I honestly felt kind of insulted as a person who lived in one of the old Shenandoah units where I lived with neighbors at many mid-income levels, and we've changed the process. As data has also shown, the people that are now paying much higher rents for those older buildings want to effectively just move to a newer unit where they're getting more bang for our buck. That's what our current data from our community service department is showing us, that was presented at our last council meeting. So I have all these thoughts in mind when I'm hearing this, and it seems like we've again sort of legislated ourselves into these problems.
I mean, I'll respond to that because I think you're gonna love what I'm about to say, but I mean, my thought process, frankly, is informed by my life experience. And I lived through one of the country's largest desegregation cases as a child. And so I felt very, very strongly that there should always be a mix of economic levels in all housing projects. I didn't want to see segmentation and striation, between our different projects. My thinking has shifted, both because of you, Dan, and also somebody did point out that even if we were to have one of our buildings serve a lower income tier and other buildings serve higher income tiers, the building that is serving the lower income tier is still next to $4 million units. So it's not as though that we are really like creating sort of that like stereotypical Section 8 housing that you would see on the East Coast in like regressive policies that we've seen in, the annals of American history. So I think, again, that's one of the reasons why I am inclined to say that we need to reevaluate our rental housing policies.
I'll comment too. I think that having all income tiers represented at all of our housing developments is like an aspirational goal. I think if it doesn't make sense on the financial side, I'm not going to live and die on that point, because at the end of the day, like, we need to make sure that our projects are financially sound, that these buildings are getting paid for. So while I think it's aspirational and I stand behind that, I'm not so rigid that I can't see that in certain circumstances we have to be flexible on that idea to make the project work. So just to respond to your comment, I think aspirationally, yes, I still think that is a guiding like concept, but if it doesn't make sense in reality, I don't want to misstep on our budget for that reason. So, and I think, moving forward, like, I think we should keep that as a priority as we look forward to new projects. Like, I wasn't in this seat when Voodoo was, conceptualized or built, and I supported it, but I think I have more of an understanding of how we can target what we want to achieve from these projects from the concept phase. And so I guess to answer your question, I still stand behind that, but recognize that it is maybe not an immediate goal that we can achieve right now.
Teddy, Geneva, do you have any comments? I just can't see you guys on the screen.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I feel like I think this is great discussion, and I think we are all sort of settling into what these policies mean and what it means financially. We wouldn't be able to have these conversations till we had the data for the year, or almost a year. And I mean, I'm on board with what Elena and me and to some extent as well Dan are saying about, not holding as tightly to my feelings about having all income levels at each project. I still think it's important that we build new units for lower income residents. But this is going to become y'all's to decide, not mine. So I don't feel as much like I should exert my extreme opinions at this moment. But I feel like the discussion's going in a really good direction.
Teddy?
Well, I think it's good that, we're bringing this up and something that we, will look at as we look at advisory committees, other options for compositions for THA if we decide to go down that path. I just think we need to, really take our time in how we do it. I also think that it's great to have this discussion now, so we know we need to talk about it in the future, but certainly in a more traditional town council meeting where more people are in attendance than the budget as well. And maybe we have to get back to the task at hand, which is trying to figure out the three options or where we're going to go.
Perfect. Okay.
Great. So it sounds like we're aligned with staff's recommendation of a basement tier D for Voodoo to meet the original goal of that project, meeting that missing middle, and the debt service associated with that, but also positioning us in a way in the future where the rental housing policies can still meet, that initial intent of the debt service. So thank you for that discussion, and understanding of what that will look like as we have future policy discussions as well. Hayden, I'll put it back to you, to keep going through. what
Sure.
we're-
So getting into the data of what it means to do 27% and 25%. Almost every tenant saw a decrease in rent by reducing the multiplier in that fashion. Typically between $100 and $400 per month. Some seeing very large decreases, $600, $900 again, like we saw in the 9%. Again, that could just be based on where they landed on the tiers. And with this change, the typical household pays 25% of their income instead of 27% this year, and 28% would have been if we don't do any reductions. I think it's important also to know kind of the implications from a budgetary standpoint as you do these reductions. Like we were saying previously, a lot of these budgets were set up, the debt model was set up with certain AMIs in mind. So as you open it up and then reduce it, you have to kind of make these shortfalls up in some fashion. As I said previously, all these properties do have a reserve from when the debt was issued. Shandoka obviously is the healthiest because it's the oldest, so it doesn't need any subsidies at all or more obligations to make the budgets whole. But you do see a little bit in Sunnyside, and VP, as well as Voodoo. Voodoo being the biggest one. No matter how you do this decrease or keeping it the same, Voodoo has to have some kind of subsidy regardless of what it is. The question is, how much is that going to be? Obviously, Sunnyside, even with this reduction, almost cash flows, and it will cash flow in the next year, just through normal increases of rent that would happen regardless of the decisions here. And VP obviously is close. Again, the boarding house has an implication given the fact that it is so seasonal and there are months where there are nobody paying rent in those units. Does create just kind of some budget constraints that we want to bring forward, and potentially policy changes to help just bridge that gap a little more. I'll turn it over to Delaney. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think this is more, to use someone's word from earlier, philosophical. I think that these three options being presented to you, speaking on behalf of the tenant population, the third option is the one that will benefit our current tenant population and future tenants the most. It will be very meaningful to them. However, this is a budget meeting and we do need council's direction on how they would prefer we proceed in order to be fiscally responsible. I guess that's all I would add.
And I'm just going to ask you guys, obviously we're presenting it within the 2026 budget, and we have reserves within the current funds right now in any of these scenarios to meet the required subsidy. Looking into the future, can you just quickly touch on beyond 2026, the impacts of these three scenarios so that they have that understanding?
We find where I wrote that down. So under this change, as we said, the tenants see the most reductions in their rent. Voodoo would deplete their reserves almost immediately following this year. So this year they would be on a whole, and then part of next year. So if we decided to do these policy changes and then keep them moving perpetually, this year would be the only year you could fully subsidize the moral obligation. And the next year you'd have to find either for the housing fund or increasing rents. VP and Sunnyside would exhaust their reserves in 2 to 3 years, assuming you don't make any other rent changes in the next 2 or 3 years. So they could fully support any of these changes for the next 2 or 3 years. And then if you did do a 3% or a 4% increase following typical inflation rates, those budgets would then model out, they'd be kept sustainable. And then obviously Shandoka with the new building F would narrowly break even this year, but every single year, regardless of how we do, this multiplier does have some sort of reserve put into the budget because of just how stable that revenue source is. So to Zoe's point, each one of these can support this year for sure. If you do decide to do this and you want to see this model play out and see what the impacts are, some properties, obviously Voodoo in particular, would need some type of thought process. And again, it's important to note too that property can be refinanced in 2 years, and that plays a big role too in this finance discussion as well. So as you work through these models, in 2 years is when you can basically model that debt out for the next 30 years if you wanted to, rather than 10.
Can you remind me what the interest rate on our loan for Voodoo
Yeah,
is?
there's 3 different loans. I think the lowest one's 4.6 and the highest one's 5.5, I believe. So you have quite a vary there. And I think interest right now is in the lower 4s, I believe we got for BP2A. So interest is lower currently, but again, given how the debt was issued back when we started, we're not eligible to refinance until 2027, end of 2027. So 2 full years.
I mean, I support the lower multipliers from the beginning of this whole conversation. I wanted lower multipliers for rent. So this is kind of aligning with my original desires for the rental policies. And I think, you know, I feel like this is why we have reserves and this is why we subsidize housing. It's to make it affordable. So I don't have any issues with that approach. And I think this seems like it will get us to that refinancing date. So I would be in favor of that that strategy. And I think if we don't increase the AMI, I think we'll just have like compounding effects of that are going to mess us up, you know, down the road. So I think we need to keep our AMI numbers accurate and then adjust the rental rates as we see appropriate. I think that's the right way to approach this.
Geneva?
Yeah, I mean, just adding up I agree with Elena. I think we should do the third option and then at the recommendation of staff, lower the multipliers, do the AMI increase, and then further continue to examine, you know, what we were talking about earlier. What are the AMIs of folks who actually live in our housing as opposed to what HUD is saying? But looking at the moral obligation line items for each or the subsidy required to keep these afloat out of reserves is a total of $365,000, unless I'm reading that incorrectly. But it seems to me like we'd save ourselves some time later, and some discussion later if we just transfer that money from the Affordable Housing Fund as like a one-time capital or one time at this moment for this year capital transfer and allow the reserves to maintain so that we can actually look at so that they have what they need into the future and we don't have to do it piecemeal later on. I think we knew that we were going to have to see how this program is working, what rents are appropriate. I am in favor of subsidizing more so that rent is more reasonable for our residents. So to me, that seems like a cleaner option rather than spending down reserves and then coming back later to replace them. Because it will just kind of make it tough to look once everything stabilizes. Now that we've put in all these policies, it will be easier to look at the budgets year over year if we don't have to have an asterisk that's like, remember, we spent down the reserves because we changed the multiplier, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I would love to handle it, or how I suggest we handle it. But I am 2 thumbs up on using that 9% increase AMI to go along with HUD and to lower the multiplier.
Perfect. Thank you. Do you have anything?
I mean, without redebating the entire housing policies, for the time being, I can live with staff recommendation of accepting the AMI increase while lowering the multiplier.
Teddy, do you have thoughts?
Yep, I agree completely. I think it's a good idea and the way to move forward.
Okay. And I agree. Obviously I was in the meeting. I think this is fiscally responsible. I think this is in following the policy that we created. The policy was sound, and I think lowering the multiplier is what is going to actually serve our community best. I like Geneva's suggestion that we make a one-time capital transfer, but I would look to Kaylee as somebody who understands that process far more than I do. Sort of what those implications are, and
We could perhaps circle back to that at the.
I was going to say, maybe
next meeting.
we give the opportunity for staff to weigh those potentials and understand, you know, our goals of refinancing in 2 years and what makes the most sense under that assumption as well, unless you guys have any immediate feedback.
When you say capital, you're meaning the affordable housing fund, correct?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, I meant to
Totally,
clarify that. I
100%.
didn't mean out of Rhett.
I
so-
just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion either way. I would look to you and ask you what you think we should do. So yeah.
I
but-
think we understand the direction, and if you're okay, we can place that next step in staff's hands to determine what is the best, either from the Affordable Housing Fund or down to the reserves, and we will just make that adjustment within the budget, but for the 21st meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
To continue the next steps though, so we do
Yep.
have, so with these
Nope.
adopted
You did.
proposed changes, there are, we said, changes coming to the housing policy, right? So if you do decide to reduce multiplier, that'll have to come from the housing policy, just to give you some dates. We'll be looking either November 25th or 16th to have those discussions to then go live before January 1st. So
I would selfishly ask for you to consider, and I know it's the organizational meeting, I would seriously request that you consider putting it on the November 25th agenda, because staff is going to need time to get changes implemented, redo paperwork, etc. We can do it in advance. It'll just be easier if we know definitively what types of decisions are being made.
The 25th instead of the 5th. Is that what you
it's the
mean?
16th of December, so you have the 25th of November as an option.
Oh, or the
Or
16th.
December 16th. If we do it on the 25th of November, that gives us all of December to figure out what these changes will do to all tenants, active and future. So we just would ask for more time between to figure out what that looks like.
And obviously, the reality of implementation is that everyone gets a new lease now as soon as possible. So staff will be working on how administratively we can be accomplishing that while making sure we're doing the best for the community. So we're working a lot of that already on streamlining and making these processes simpler. And then hopefully that will feed into some of this other implementation as well.
I just have a concern of the feasibility of doing that at that November 25th meeting with two members who are very likely not as well versed in all of these nuances as the rest of us. And
Yeah.
if nobody likes special meetings, but if there was something we could knock out with the current 6 of us.
To be clear, it
But-
would be minimal
Okay.
amendments to the existing policies that would reflect decisions made today tied to budget. It wouldn't be a full-blown.
We would have to do that at a
policy.
later date. Yeah. But I do hear Dan, and if we wanted to try to amend those policies prior to a November 4th with a special meeting, we can,
Whatever staff feels is best. I just had the thought and the
Yeah.
concern. But
how does the rest of this council share that concern? I mean, for us, I'll ask staff, what do we need to prepare to do that? If it's minimal, there's not much preparation. So the more leeway we have that benefits staff, it's more, does council want to have a special meeting?
I mean, my
specifically?
inclination was to put it on our next agenda.
October 21st.
Yes.
Oh, October
Um,
21st?
And that date sadly will not work. I am gone all next week. Ellie has been gone this week, and we will
Okay.
need to work together on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with Dan. I think housing policies are complex, and I would want to set up our new council for success. So I think I would be inclined for a special meeting.
I don't know if
Great.
we have to decide. We
Yeah.
can
Yeah, and I'll,
let staff
and maybe
work
we
on that.
can, after this meeting, how about I quickly talk with Delaney and see if there's anything we can do to get it on the 21st? Obviously, we don't want to take up her time, but what can we work with Ally on to see if we can get it on the 21st?
Okay.
Ahead of that, and if not, then we can look at a special meeting. But with that, just to hone in, so this, for that work session, and maybe it's work session action item for, that change. The changes that we would like for you to consider. So right now, the rental housing policy is obviously the multiplier. So we will be redefining what that multiplier is. In our housing policies, it talks about Voodoo having a basement of C that we need to adjust to D. And then as Hayden mentioned and Delaney mentioned, the boarding house. So the boarding house model really is impacting the Virginia Placer, and it has impacted Virginia Placer budget and cash flow for quite, well, since its inception because of the seasonality. Part of the policies do not allow for master leasing. However, I think the boarding house should be carved out of that for its sole purpose of seasonal workforce, and to have maybe another entity helping subsidize any of those large holes that the town itself is wholly subsidizing is something that we would like you to consider as a option for this fix.
Sounds great.
I don't know, there's more discussion on that one. But if everyone's good with those are what we were going to present for this immediate change, unless I miss anything. Okay.
Are we thumbs upping to the boarding house? What am I thumbs upping to right now?
Let's break it down. I think we've thumbs up to, we've already had good discussion on the first two. So if I can just get very clear thumbs up on the third,
Oh, yeah.
which is for the boarding house.
The third being the boarding house.
Yeah. For us to allow for
First
master leasing.
station. Like, we'll have a conversation about it.
We'll have a conversation about it.
Yes.
Okay, so we're still gonna talk about it.
We're still gonna talk about it.
Okay,
We're not making a decision right now. We
Okay.
are deciding
I was
to
unclear
have a
about.
conversation about
So,
those different.
I think it would
ones.
be-
I will have a conversation about that.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
For the next meeting, staff can be more prepared with what those changes would look like, because currently all we have is just what has existed.
Mhm.
So we can kind of forecast if we did make some changes, what that does to the budget pieces of it, right? Because right now we only model what we can legally do with the boarding house.
So the ideal is on the 21st to hold a work session, followed by an action of adopting updated housing rental policies with these 3 points honed in on. So we'd have a discussion and then later an action. If we cannot do it on the 21st, we will then look to hold a special meeting potentially before the 4th to concentrate on that. And we will discuss our best path forward with staff on those pieces.
There's one tangential piece I just want to mention so that it's for full transparency. So in changing the multipliers, there was that other piece about unit amenities. And we would add a little bit in there to show you a few options. Keep them all even. This one has 400 extra square feet. Would you like it to be a little bit more expensive than the base rate type thing? I just wanted to make sure you knew what was coming to you. Okay.
Okay, so those are the 4 topics that we will be talking about. I think we have great staff direction for the budget and great staff direction for amending the policies within this context that we will continue on into the year.
Okay.
All right.
Any other further discussion, questions? Okay. Then we will move on to action items, of which we have none, and we are going to adjourn by mutual consent.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We still made it before noon. I did not think that was gonna.